My name is Vonda Thatcher, and I'm 27 years old. Last Thanksgiving, while the pie was still warm on the table, my family held a vote on whether I deserved to stay in the family. My mom stood at the head of the table, tapped her glass, and said, "We've been carrying your dead weight for 27 years." Then she asked for a show of hands. Every relative raised one. My aunt, my cousins, my brother, even my dad. The man who taught me to ride a bike raised his hand against me like I was a zoning issue. I sat on the folding chair they always gave me and watched my own family vote me out like a line item. But here's what none of them knew that night. 20 minutes later, my uncle would walk through that door with one question in his coat pocket. And by Christmas, somebody at that table would be under investigation. It wasn't me. Welcome back to Hidden Family Revenge, where family secrets come to light, and the people everyone underestimated finally get their say. If you've ever been the one they didn't count, this story is for you. Drop a comment telling me where you're listening from, and be sure to subscribe, because you'll want to hear how this one ends. Now let me take you back to that table. The pie was my grandmother's recipe. I'd baked it that morning in my apartment across town, because in my family, you don't show up empty-handed unless you want it recorded. We'd made it through turkey and green bean casserole with only the usual jabs. Then my mother, Denise, stood up and tapped her wine glass with a spoon. "Before dessert," she said, "we're going to have a family accountability meeting." She actually had an agenda. Handwritten on her monogrammed notepad, propped against the gravy boat like a hymn board. My dad, Roy, studied the tablecloth. My brother Travis checked his phone and put it away fast. Aunt Carol and Uncle Dale traded a look that told me they'd been briefed. I was the only one at that table who didn't know what the meeting was about, which meant the meeting was about me. "This family runs on contribution," Mom said, in the sweet, level voice she used for reading meeting minutes at church. "Some people give, some people take, and it is time we stopped pretending not to notice." The dishwasher hummed away in the kitchen like nothing was happening. I remember thinking how normal everything looked. The cornucopia centerpiece, the good napkins, the kids' table in the den. Then Mom reached into her cardigan pocket and set down her evidence. "Your grandmother's wedding ring is missing from Birchwood," she said. "It has been missing for weeks, and I think everyone here knows who visits her the most." My cousin Brittany actually gasped, which was generous, since I'd later learned she'd already heard this story twice in the group chat. Every face at that table turned toward me, slow and synchronized, like sunflowers. And that was the moment I understood this wasn't a dinner. It was a trial, and the verdict had been drafted before I ever rang the doorbell. I opened my mouth to answer the thing about the ring. Mom raised one finger, the way you'd quiet a child. "You'll get your turn, Vonda. First, the family deserves the full picture." The full picture, in her telling, took about 4 minutes. I was the daughter who flunked out of college and wasted their tuition money, the one who never chipped in when things got hard, the one who showed up for holidays with a pie and a smile while everyone else bled for this family. She'd saved the closer, and she delivered it looking straight at me. "We've been carrying your dead weight for 27 years. 27? My exact age. She'd rounded my whole life into a debt. "So we're going to do this fairly," she said, "the way this family has always done things. All in favor of Vonda taking a step back from this family until she learns what it means to contribute. Raise your hand." Carol's hand went up first, fast, like she'd been holding it back all dinner. Dale followed. Brittany raised hers without looking up from her lap. Travis rubbed his jaw, glanced at Mom, and lifted his hand halfway. Which counts. And then my dad, who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to fix my water heater, put his hand in the air, and could not put his eyes anywhere near me. Hospice work teaches your face to stay still while your chest caves in. I used every hour of that training. I stood, folded the folding chair, and leaned it against the wall. "Keep the chair," I said. Nobody spoke. I made it to the front hallway before my hands started shaking, and I want to tell you why my father's hand went up that night. Because the answer starts 8 years earlier, with a phone call from a hospital. I was 19, a sophomore at Kent State, when my dad had his stroke. He survived it, thank God. But the right side of his body came back slow, like a radio station you can almost tune in. Somebody had to be there. For the shower rails, the physical therapy, the pills sorted into little plastic mornings and nights. My mom kept working. Somebody has to keep the insurance, she said, which was true, and also very convenient, because it meant the somebody in the house was me. I withdrew from the semester. I told myself it was one semester. It was 7 months of driving Dad to therapy, learning to cook low sodium, and sleeping with one ear open. My scholarship didn't survive the withdrawal. The refund from the college came back partial, the way refunds do. I have never once regretted those 7 months, and my dad got most of himself back, and I would do it again tomorrow. Here's what I didn't see coming. The story that got written about it. By the time Dad could drive again, the version circulating at family dinners was that Vonda flunked out and threw away the tuition her parents had scraped together. Mom never said it to me directly. She said it near me. To Carol. Over coffee. To the church ladies. Once, memorably, to a checkout girl at the Kroger who had asked, politely, how I was doing. She's finding herself, Mom said, with a little laugh that did all the work. I corrected the record exactly once, at 20, and Mom sighed and said, Honey, nobody likes a martyr. That was the first entry in the family ledger written in my name, and I didn't fight it, and I need you to understand that every entry after it got easier for her to write. Every family has an economy. Ours had an accountant. My mother tracked contribution the way the IRS tracks income, but only the kind you could see from the head of the table. When Travis paid for the new roof on our parents' house, it got announced at Easter with a toast. When Carol chipped in for my cousin's wedding, it was mentioned for 6 straight years, usually while the wedding was collapsing. Money counted, roofs counted, anything with a receipt counted. What didn't count? Rides, casseroles, 7 months of a sophomore year, or any hour spent keeping a human being alive. That work was invisible, and in my mother's economy, invisible meant free, and free meant worthless. My assigned seat told the whole story. From the year I was 19, my place at every holiday was the folding chair from the garage, wedged at the corner between the table leg and the china hutch. You're flexible, sweetheart. That's what she said the first time, and the chair simply became mine, the way a nickname becomes yours. Travis got a chair with arms. I got the one that pinched. I'd love to tell you I saw it all clearly back then, but a ledger like my mother's doesn't work by lying to you. It works by being the only book anybody reads. The relatives weren't cruel people. They were just customers of the same bank, and the bank had one teller, and she decided whose deposits got recorded. My dad knew better, I think. He'd been the one holding my arm through those 7 months. But Dad had learned a long time ago that contradicting Denise in public cost more than it paid. A ledger only works if everyone believes the bookkeeper. And everyone did. Including, for longer than I want to admit, me. Here's the part of my story my mother never told anyone. After Dad recovered, I didn't go back to Kent State. The money was gone, and the scholarship with it. So I took the long way. I worked front desk at a dental office, got my LPN at 21 through night classes, and passed my RN boards at 24. I chose hospice, which people always assume is depressing. It isn't. Hospice is the department of last honest conversations. It's the job where you stay when everyone else finds a reason to be in the hallway. It suited me. I had my own apartment on the east side of Maple Falls, a Corolla with a lot of miles and a lot of loyalty, and a savings account I was quietly proud of. $7,500, built $50 at a time, labeled house in the banking app. First house. Mine. Nobody's folding chair. My coworkers used to ask why I still went home for every holiday, given the things I let slip about my family in the break room. The answer had a name. My Grandma Pearl. Mom's mother. Pearl Prescott was the only person in that family who ever asked me what those 7 months had cost me. Everyone else just counted what I owed. Pearl kept a garden that fed half of Quarry Road, wore the same thin gold wedding band for 63 years, and could end an argument with one raised eyebrow. When I got my nursing license, she framed a copy. Framed it. hung it in her hallway between her wedding photo and a picture of Jesus, which in Pearl's house was the highest real estate there was. You'd sit in her kitchen and feel like somebody finally had you on the books. So when Pearl started slipping, I noticed before anyone else did. Noticing was my profession. It was about to become my burden. It started the year I was 22, with a pot of green beans scorched black on Pearl's stove and a smoke smell she blamed on the neighbors. Then the same question 3 times in one phone call. Then her Buick found parked on the shoulder of Quarry Road, a half-mile past her own driveway, with Pearl insisting she'd just wanted to look at the pasture. I'm a nurse. I knew what I was looking at, and I said so, carefully, at Sunday dinner. My mother waved it off with a fork. Mom's just tired. She's been tired for 80 years. I didn't let it go. I drove Pearl to her doctor myself, sat in on the appointment, started a medication list, put whiteboard reminders on her fridge. You can do a lot for a person who is slipping. What you can't do is be there at 2 in the morning when she puts a kettle on and forgets it. And that January, Pearl walked out to get the mail in 14-degree weather in her house slippers and was found 2 streets over by a man walking his dog. That's the kind of event that finally convenes a family. At the hospital, while I was talking discharge planning with the social worker, my mother arrived carrying a folder. Inside was a power of attorney, financial and medical, naming Denise Thatcher as agent, drawn up by a lawyer from her church, signed by Pearl on one of her good days 2 months earlier. I never found out what Pearl understood she was signing. Don't look so surprised, Mom said, clicking her pen. Somebody has to be the grown-up, and we all know it can't be you. She squeezed my shoulder on the way past, the way you'd pat a well-meaning dog. I'll handle everything from here. Those words should have been a comfort. They were a door closing. Birchwood Memory Care sat 20 minutes from my apartment. Low brick buildings with real gardens, and it smelled right. Anyone who works in my field will tell you that you learn a facility by its smell and its staff turnover before you ever read a brochure. Birchwood was good. Good costs money, $3,700 a month. At the family meeting in my parents' living room, Mom ran the numbers like a treasurer. Pearl's little house on Quarry Road would be kept for the family. Her savings were spoken for. Then the split. Jean will cover half. Roy and I will manage the rest. Her brother, Jean, my uncle, nodded from the corner without a word, which was Jean's whole personality. I raised my hand and offered to contribute. I had a nursing salary. I had standing. Or thought I did. My mother laughed, in front of everyone. The laugh she saved for making a person smaller. Sweetheart, you can barely manage yourself. The subject moved on. But in the kitchen afterward, while I rinsed plates, she appeared at my elbow with a different voice entirely. Flat, quick, no audience. If you actually want to be useful for once, the shortfall is $18.50 a month. But you will not parade it around. This family doesn't need a martyr. It needs discretion. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Of course I said yes. It was Pearl. The next morning, I set up an automatic payment from my checking account, made out directly to Birchwood Memory Care, $1,850 on the 1st of every month. I told no one, exactly as instructed, and honestly the secrecy suited the part of me that believed love shouldn't need a receipt. I thought I was buying my grandmother's care. It took me 4 years to understand I was also buying my mother an alibi. Let me tell you what $18.50 a month looks like from the inside. It looks like picking up the Saturday overnight shift, every week, for 4 years, because overnights pay a differential. It looks like a Corolla that rolled past 180,000 miles while I patched her with YouTube videos and prayer. It looks like the house fund in my banking app frozen at $7,500 like a fly in amber, because the first of the month always came around again. I'd sit with a dying stranger until dawn, holding a hand nobody else came to hold, and then drive to Birchwood before sleep and read Pearl a chapter of the Louis L'Amour Western she'd loved since 1962. The payment cleared at 2 in the morning, first of every month. 48 firsts. 48 payments. 4 years. And not one person at that Thanksgiving table knew my name was on a single one of them. That wasn't an accident, and it wasn't modesty either. Every statement, every invoice, every piece of mail from Birchwood went to the power of attorney on file. To my mother. She was the only window into that building, and she decided what the family saw through it. And what they saw was Denise and Roy, heroically managing. Meanwhile, the story about me kept compounding interest. Still renting, still single, still driving that sad little car. Bless her heart. Bless my heart. I want to pause here, because I know some of you are listening to this in a parked car or over a sink of dishes, and you are the person in your family quietly holding the whole thing together while somebody else takes the credit. If that's you, tell me in the comments. I read everyone. And hit subscribe, because what my mother did when I finally asked one small question, I still can't talk about without my hands going cold. People ask why I stayed quiet for 4 years, and I want to be honest. I did try. Once. Thanksgiving. The year I was 24. Brittany, between bites of my pie, asked the question she'd clearly been sent in with. So what do you actually, contribute? Everybody else pitches in. The table went pleasantly quiet. Forks poised, an audience settling. I kept my voice level and said, I help with Grandma's facility. Every month. For about 2 seconds it felt like stepping into sunlight. Then my mother laughed. Warm, indulgent, aimed at the whole table. Oh, honey, we let her chip in a little. It teaches responsibility. Roy and I handle the real costs, obviously. Obviously. Carol nodded. Dale nodded. Travis reached over and patted my shoulder. And I promise you no one has ever been patted smaller. And here's the trap. The actual mechanical trap. So you don't sit there thinking I was a coward. Every bill went to her. Every receipt. Every statement. Sealed behind a power of attorney I had no legal right to see around. Birchwood's front office was kind to me as a visitor and a fellow nurse, but kind doesn't override privacy law, and the one time I asked a billing clerk a general question, word got back to Mom by Sunday. To prove my payments existed, I'd have had to hand my bank statements around the gravy like a crazy person, on trial at my own dinner, calling my mother a liar to her face with Pearl's care hanging in the balance. She held the paper. She held the story. She held my grandmother. So I did what I always did, what I had trained myself to call strength. I got quiet. And quiet, I would eventually learn, was the most expensive thing I ever gave that family. You might be wondering why grown adults let one woman run the whole family off a handwritten agenda. Simple. Every hand at that table was in her debt. When Travis's heating and cooling business hit the rocks 2 winters ago, a truck engine, a lawsuit from a bad install, all at once, it was Mom who slid a check across his kitchen table. $25,000 from your father and me, with the reminder renewed at every holiday since, the way you'd renew a subscription. When Carol's transmission died, the bank of Denise covered it. When Dale got laid off, groceries appeared. She never called them loans. Loans get paid off and closed. These were gifts. And gifts in my mother's economy came with a lifetime of compounding gratitude, payable in loyalty, on demand. I watched it for years and called it generosity, because from a distance that's what it looks like. It took me embarrassingly long to do the simple math a stranger would do in a minute. My mother worked part-time keeping books for a granite countertop place. My father had a machinist's pension and a Social Security check. They lived carefully, coupons, 1 vacation a year to the same cabin. People like that do not have $25,000 lying around to rescue a son's business, plus transmissions, plus groceries, plus half of Birchwood, which is what everyone believed they were paying. The money had to be coming from somewhere. It never once occurred to me to ask where, because the somewhere had always been dressed up as my parents' sacrifice, and questioning sacrifice is sacrilege in a family like mine. That was my mistake, and I own it. 4 years I stood inside arm's reach of the answer. The person who finally asked the question wasn't me. It was the quiet man in the corner, and he asked it out loud. I need you to meet Pearl the way I had her, before I tell you the rest. Sunday afternoons, Birchwood, the chair by the window with the good light. Some Sundays she knew me cold. "Vonda Jean, you look like you slept in that car." And some Sundays I was simply the one with the kind hands, which I came to treasure just as much, because it meant that even when the names fell away, the knowing didn't. Dementia isn't a light switching off. It's weather. Fog rolls in, fog rolls out, and you learn to drop everything and live inside the clear patches. In the clear patches we sang. She kept every hymn and half the Patsy Cline catalog long after she lost the word for spoon. Music files itself somewhere the disease is slow to find. She'd tell me about her husband, my grandfather Walt, gone before I was born, and about raising 2 kids on a machinist's wage, and her hand would go to her wedding band and spin it while she talked. 63 years of habit worn right into the gold. The staff loved her. I watched them the way I can't help watching. Response times, turnover, whether the aides crouched to eye level, and Birchwood passed, week after week. Whatever else is true of my mother, the facility she chose was a good one. I'll give her that, and you'll see later why I mention it. One Sunday in October, the fog rolled out farther than I'd seen in a year. Pearl looked at me a long moment, sharp as her old self, and then out at the parking lot, like she was checking who was coming. "Sit closer," she said. And I did, because a voice inside me, the nurse voice, the granddaughter voice, both, said this window is open for a reason. What happened next took less than a minute, and I have replayed it 1,000 times. Pearl worked the thin gold band off her finger. It fought her, 63 years leaves a groove, and pressed it into my palm. Then she folded my fingers over it, one at a time, deliberate as prayer. "Grandma, no," I said. "That stays with you." Her hands stayed over mine, stronger than they had any right to be. "Some things shouldn't go in the ledger," she said. Clear. Level. Looking me dead in the eye, like the fog had never existed, like she'd been saving the sentence. I didn't know then that she'd ever heard the word ledger from me. I'd never once complained to her about the family accounting. I'd have sooner cursed in church. Then her eyes went to the window again and she added softer, half to herself, "Hold on to it. The vultures circle when the pasture's for sale." And the window closed. Just like that. She asked if we were staying for supper, called me Colleen, patted my hand like I was the one who needed comforting. I sat there with her ring burning in my fist and my training telling me confusion. Word salad, don't chase meaning, while some older, colder instinct told me the exact opposite. I tried to give it back the next Sunday, on a clearish day. She looked at the ring, looked at me, and raised the eyebrow. Conversation over. So I did what felt like the only honest thing. I threaded it onto the chain around my neck, next to the little cross and behind my nurse badge, where it rested over my sternum every shift after. Guarding it, not keeping it. 3 weeks later my phone rang and it was my mother, whom I hadn't heard from in months, and there was no hello. "Vonda, where is your grandmother's ring?" I'll come back to that phone call. What my mother was really asking only makes sense next to the letter that had landed in mailboxes that same week. Birchwood sent a letter. I saw it because a copy was posted in the family lounge, addressed to all responsible parties. The memory care wing was closing. Corporate restructuring, rate increases across the remaining units, all residents to be transitioned within 90 days. For most families, that letter was a headache. For me, it was a starting gun. I work in this world. I know which buildings are good before the tour starts. Harbor Pines was the answer. Smaller, better staffed, a memory garden Pearl would love, and 10 minutes from my apartment instead of 20. There was even a chance to soften the cost. Walt had been a Korea-era veteran, and there are aid programs for widows that nobody tells families about. All of it was doable. All of it needed 2 things I didn't have: the power of attorney's signature and Pearl's financial records for the application. So I called my mother, kept it practical, and laid it out. The closure, Harbor Pines, the veterans program, the deadline. I offered to do every ounce of the paperwork myself. She let me finish. Then, in the voice she used for waitresses, my mom said, Your grandmother's finances are none of your business. They never have been. Don't call this number about this again. And something 4 years deep in me finally shifted its weight. Fine, I said. Then I'll ask the billing office myself. 90 days, Mom. Someone has to move. The silence on the line lasted 3 of my breaths. I remember thinking, in my innocence, that I'd finally gotten through to her. What I'd actually done was trip a wire. She hung up without a word, and the machinery began to turn. The ring call came that Friday. Vonda, where is your grandmother's ring? No hello, no context. And I, fool that I was, answered like a granddaughter instead of like a defendant. I said Pearl had given it to me to hold, that I wore it on a chain, that she could see at any time. Interesting, my mother said, and the word had edges. Grandma can't consent to giving away assets, sweetheart. You of all people should know that. Assets. Her mother's wedding band was an asset now. By Sunday, the family group chat, the one I was still in back then, had a new topic. Carol. Has anyone else noticed things going missing at Birchwood? Brittany. Didn't Grandma have a ring? Dale. Sad. You think you know people. Nobody named me. Nobody had to. I was the one who visited every week, which had somehow stopped being devotion and become opportunity. The same week, Brittany forwarded a link with a row of shocked face emojis. A real estate listing, photographed on a gray morning. A house I knew better than my own body. Pearl's place on Quarry Road. The garden beds, the porch swing, the kitchen where I'd felt like a person. Getting an appraisal, Mom explained in the chat, breezy, just being responsible. And when I called Birchwood's billing office like I'd promised, the kind woman there was suddenly very sorry. Records could only be discussed with the power of attorney. There was a note on the account now, she said. Apologetic, and I could hear it was new. Every door I might walk through was being locked in order, quietly, while the group chat sharpened its opinion of me. Then, Tuesday of Thanksgiving week, a text from my mother. Sweet as pie filling. Come home Thursday, sweetheart. We'll sort everything out as a family. I almost didn't go. I want that on the record. I sat in my car in the hospice parking lot Wednesday night and talked it through with Rosa, the social worker on my unit, in that hypothetical way we all use, asking for a friend, family stuff. I asked what a person could do if a relative with power of attorney was stonewalling a needed facility transfer. Rosa didn't sugarcoat it. Without standing, not much. POA is a fortress. Unless something rises to the level of Adult Protective Services, the agent holds the cards. Adult Protective Services. I actually laughed and said we weren't there. It was just family being family. Rosa gave me a look I've given other people 100 times and said, okay, but write things down, with dates. I didn't know yet how right she was, and I want you to remember that conversation, because I'll be honest, everything after it happens fast. Thursday I baked the pie, because showing up empty-handed is an entry in the book, and I drove the 15 minutes to my parents' house with the radio off, rehearsing calm sentences about Harbor Pines and 90 days. One thing nagged at me on the way. Jean wasn't coming. Uncle Jean came every year, quiet in the corner, first to leave. But Mom had mentioned, offhand, that Jean's got a thing, he'll come Friday instead. Jean had never had a thing in his life. I filed it under small mercies and kept driving, which tells you what my instincts were worth by then, worn down the way anybody's would be. Then I turned into my parents' street and slowed. Cars lined the driveway and spilled along the curb, more than any Thanksgiving I could remember. It looked less like a dinner, and more like a quorum. It was one. So now you know what I knew, standing in that front hallway with my hands shaking, and I hope the scene plays differently for you the second time, because it plays differently for me every night. The handwritten agenda propped on the gravy boat wasn't a quirky habit. It was a script, drafted sometime between my phone call about the billing office and that sugar-sweet text, and every scene in it had a job. The missing ring wasn't an accusation. It was insurance, because you don't have to answer a witness's questions if you've already made her a thief. Dead weight wasn't an insult. It was an eviction notice, read aloud for the record in front of the whole jury of people who owed her. She had rounded my life to zero in public, so that if I ever stood up waving bank statements, the room would already know what I was. Unstable, ungrateful, caught stealing from her own grandmother, saying anything to get even. 27 years of quiet, cashed against me in 4 minutes. And the hands went up. Carol fast, Dale steady, Brittany hiding in her lap, Travis at half-mast with his 25,000 reasons, and my father last, my father slowest, my father not looking at me. That's the part I couldn't file anywhere for the longest time. The vote she could have. The hand that had held my arm through 7 months of therapy hallways. That one I couldn't spare. I stood in the hallway breathing like I teach dying men to breathe. In for 4, out for 6. My keys already in my fist. And that's when headlights swept the curtains, and gravel popped in the driveway, and I heard the particular slam of a pickup door that every person in that dining room knew by heart. Jean had not waited for Friday. My Uncle Jean is 62 years old, a retired electrician, a widower, and the least dramatic human being God ever made. He entered his mother's daughter's house the way he entered every house, without knocking, wiping his boots longer than necessary, cold November air walking in with him. Then he stopped in the dining room doorway and took inventory the way he'd read a breaker panel. The untouched pie, the agenda against the gravy boat, 11 guilty faces, and me in the hallway with my coat half on and my eyes doing something my face refused to. His hat was in his hands. I'd learn later that the hat in the hands was the tell. Jean holds his hat when he's decided something. "Am I late for dinner?" he said, to no one in particular, "or for whatever this is." You could hear the dishwasher change cycles. My mother recovered first. She always recovered first, sliding between him and the table with the hostess voice on. "Jean, we didn't think you could make it until Friday. There's plenty left. Let me fix you a plate." "Yeah," Jean said, not moving. "About Friday." He set his hat on the sideboard, which he had never once done in my lifetime, and looked at his sister with an expression I couldn't read yet. "Funny thing happened this week, Denise. I called Birchwood's billing office about the rate increase." The room did not gasp. It did something quieter and worse. It went perfectly still. 11 people simultaneously remembering how to sit like children in church. And from the hallway I watched the first crack run through my mother's face, hairline thin, sealed over in half a second. But I'd seen it. "Maybe the family," Jean said, pulling out the chair nobody sits in, "should hear about my phone call before anybody votes on anything." Jean sat down like it was a work site and he had all day. "Rate increase notice comes," he said. "I call to ask what the new number's going to be since I pay half." Nice girl in billing pulls up the account. He looked around the table, unhurried. A man double-checking his figures in front of the customer. "She thanks me for being such a reliable family," says, and I'm quoting as best I can. "Between you and the granddaughter, this is one of our smoothest accounts. 4 years of autopay, and she's never missed a month." He let that sit. So I ask her, "Which granddaughter?" Every head at that table turned toward me for the second time that night, but the current had reversed. Sunflowers again. Different sun. I hadn't moved from the hallway doorway. I couldn't have moved if the house were burning. My mother laughed, a small bright thing with nothing under it. "Jean, honey, there's obviously a mix-up. Vonda chips in a little something. We've never hidden that." $1,850, Jean said. "A month." He said it the way he'd read a meter, no flourish. "Same as mine, to the dollar." Which is funny, Denise, because 1850 plus 1850 is the whole bill. Nobody breathed. Travis's face was doing slow arithmetic. Carol's hand had found her necklace. "So here's my first question," Jean said, and finally looked straight at his sister. "For 4 years you've told me you and Roy were covering the other half of Mom's care. The girl's autopay is the other half. So what exactly have you been covering?" The dishwasher clicked off, and the silence it left behind had a texture, like the air after a lightning strike. My mother straightened the agenda against the gravy boat, a bookkeeper squaring her papers. "That," she said, "is a gross oversimplification. Jean nodded slowly. Then let's unsimplify it. Before I drove up here, Jean said, I stopped by the bank. Our names are both on Mom's old accounts from when Dad died. Denise had me sign on to everything, years back. Said it was easier. He rubbed his jaw. First time I've ever looked. My mistake, and I'll carry that. He laid it out in his flat electrician's voice, a man reading a panel that someone had wired wrong on purpose. Pearl's pension and her Social Security, $2,300 a month, had been direct deposited every month for 4 years into an account titled for Pearl's expenses. An account with one authorized spender. Not $1 of it had ever reached Birchwood, because Birchwood was already paid in full. By me, and by Jean, neither of us knowing about the other. $2,300 a month, 48 months, Jean said. That's $110,000. Give or take. Sitting somewhere. Spent on something. He looked at his sister with something worse than anger. It was grief with its sleeves rolled up. Who's been carrying whom, Denise? No one could look at my mother. I want you to understand what that sentence means in a family like mine, where looking at Denise, for permission, for approval, for the weather report, was our whole religion. Carol studied her plate. Dale studied Carol. Brittany had gone the color of the tablecloth, and my father sat with his eyes shut like a man in a falling elevator. Travis was the one who broke, his voice coming out young. Mom, the 25 grand, for my shop. Not a question, barely even words. My mother did not answer him. $110,000, 4 years, my own mother. If your jaw is on the floor right now, hit subscribe, because I swear to you the offer this family made me 3 weeks later was worse than the vote itself. And I almost took it. Here is the part I didn't expect. My mother did not deny it. She stood up, smoothed her cardigan, and defended it. Fine, she said, calm as a closing statement. Let's talk about carrying. And she took us to 1979. Her father dead in March, a machinist's widow with 2 kids, and Denise, 12 years old, at the kitchen table every Sunday night with a composition book, doing the grocery math so her mother wouldn't cry in front of the milkman. I was 12, doing this family's arithmetic. Who found the money when the furnace went? Who organized every funeral, every wedding, every Christmas since Carter was president? Who drove Mom to every appointment for 30 years? Her voice never rose. It crystallized. You think care is free? I have been this family's bank since I was a child, and a bank collects. That money is my wages. 40 years of wages. I just collected them myself. For one terrible second I saw her whole, the girl with the composition book who learned that the only person who never gets thrown away is the one holding the ledger, and who grew up to make sure of it. My chest actually ached for her, and I hated that it did. Then she turned to me, and the softness she'd never once spent on me came out for the kill. You of all people should understand invisible work, Vonda. The room waited. 4 years of quiet stood up in me and, for once, said something short. I do understand it, Mom. I just never sent Grandma the bill. I watched the sentence land, watched her flinch like the words had mass, and my father, who had not said a thing since his hand went up, pushed back his chair, stood, and walked out of the dining room. We heard the bedroom door click shut, gentle as an apology, and somehow that small sound ended the evening. A family can take years to build and 20 minutes to empty. Carol left first, murmuring, "We didn't know," to a point on the wall between Jean and me, which was true and also useless, since not knowing had been the whole design. Dale steered her out with a hand on her back and a nod at nobody. Brittany was doing something urgent on her phone, and I'd bet my license she was scrubbing the group chat. Travis stayed in his seat the longest, staring at the table like the wood owed him an explanation, and when he finally passed me in the hallway, he stopped, opened his mouth, and settled for Vonnie. Before his voice quit on him. He hadn't called me Vonnie since middle school. Nobody apologized. I need you to hear that. You at the sink. You in the parked car. Nobody apologized, and some of them, I could already tell, were quietly furious at me. Because the truth had made accomplices of them all? And it's easier to resent the witness than to refund the loyalty. My mother cleared dessert plates alone, spine straight, a treasurer after the audit, already redrafting. I collected my pie, untouched, still in its carrier, because leaving it felt like tithing to a church I'd just quit. Jean followed me out to the cold driveway and stood by my car the way he stands at gravesides. "You should have told me, kid," he said at last. I looked at this good, quiet man, and I was too hollowed out to be gentle. "You should have asked." He took that like a man checking his own wiring and nodding at the fault. Then I drove the 15 minutes back to my apartment, sat in the parking lot, and let my hands shake. I believed the worst night was behind me. My mother was just getting started. 5 days. That's how long it took her to remind everyone who still held the paper. Monday after Thanksgiving, I drove to Birchwood for my usual visit and was met in the lobby by the director, who could not look at me either. It was becoming a theme. Pearl had been checked out that morning. Transferred. The power of attorney had signed her out to a facility called Crestline Manor, 2.5 hours south, a name I knew from professional gossip the way you know a restaurant with a C rating, cheaper by a lot, staffing ratios you could read from the parking lot, and the new resident file, the director told me, apologetic, professional, dying inside, included a visitor list, drawn up by the agent under her authority. My name was not on it. Neither was Jean's. My mother had taken $110,000 from her own mother, been caught in front of the family she ruled, and her answer was to move the evidence, to move my grandmother, beyond my reach, and to lock the door with the same laminated document she'd carried into that hospital 4 years ago. The Quarry Road listing went from appraisal to a red sold pending banner that same week. She needed to fill the hole in the money before anyone with authority came looking, and the house was the plug. I did the thing I had spent my whole life not doing. I looked up probate attorneys, picked the one 2 towns over with the elder law certification, and sat in a parking lot saying my own family's story out loud to a stranger on the phone, which is a kind of dying, if you've never done it. The consultation was free. The retainer was not. $7,500, the exact size of my first house fund, to the dollar. The universe keeps a ledger too, apparently, and it has a sense of humor. The attorney's name was Marjorie Okafor, and she had a grandmother clock in her office and no patience for softening things. She walked me through it in an hour. A power of attorney is not a crown, it's a duty, and an agent who diverts the principal's funds for her own use has broken it. That's called financial exploitation, and it has remedies with teeth. Remedy 1, a report to Adult Protective Services, which investigates. Remedy 2, a petition for emergency guardianship, asking the probate court to suspend the POA and appoint someone else, me, to make Pearl's decisions until the dust settled. Both at once, she said, was the strong play, especially with Jean's bank records, his testimony, and the dated notes I'd been keeping since Rosa told me to write things down. Then she folded her hands. "You're a nurse, Vonda? Licensed in Ohio?" I said yes. "Then I'll tell you what you already know. With what you've seen, you may not have the luxury of staying neutral. You're a mandated reporter. Family doesn't exempt you." I looked at the petition on her desk, my name typed above a signature line, in the matter of Pearl Prescott, an alleged incompetent, the law's tender vocabulary. And I'll tell you the truth I'm not proud of. I asked for time. "There's no version of this where your family stays intact," Marjorie had said gently, like a diagnosis, and the oldest muscle in me was still flexing. Handle it quietly, carry it privately, don't make the family choose, because some part of me still believed that if I just carried enough, someday somebody would look up and see me doing it. The petition sat unsigned on her desk when I left. It sat unsigned for 6 days. On the 7th day, my phone rang at work, an area code from 2.5 hours south, and a voice said, "Is this the granddaughter?" Crestline Manor was calling me because I was listed in Pearl's old Birchwood chart as an emergency medical contact, a leftover nobody had thought to scrub. Small mercies run in my family on one side only. Pearl was in the hospital. Dehydration, a urinary tract infection gone systemic enough to scramble her worse than baseline, several days of missed medications reconstructed from a chart that read, to my professional eye, like a facility drowning. We've been a bit short-staffed, the voice said, which is the 11 o'clock news of nursing homes. It means exactly what you fear. I drove 2.5 hours through December rain with my wipers on the fast setting and my mind on the flat, factual setting I keep for the worst shifts. I knew precisely how this happened. Not villains. Arithmetic. One aide to too many residents. A woman who can't ask for water because the fog took the asking. A med cart that runs late until late becomes never. My mother had parked her own mother inside that arithmetic to save money that was never hers to save. The hospital was small and clean and trying. Pearl looked like a rough draft of herself against those pillows, and I did the thing I do for strangers and had never once needed to do for her. Checked the IV site, read the bag, counted her breaths against my watch. Then her eyes opened, and the fog was thin. God knows how. Her hand came up off the blanket, slow as a lift bridge, and found the chain at my neck, the cross, the badge, the ring. Her fingers closed around the ring, and she held on, and she looked at me. She didn't say anything. She didn't have to. There was a knock behind me, knuckles soft on the doorframe, and my father stood there holding his hat like his brother-in-law, saying, "Your mother sent me." My dad is not a talker, so I knew every sentence had been packed for him like a lunch. He stood at the foot of Pearl's bed and delivered them in order. The family had met. Another meeting, imagine, and everyone agreed things had gotten out of hand. The vote was rescinded. "It's like it never happened, Vani. Your mother is prepared to pay back every cent," he said, on a schedule, handled inside the family, the way family should handle things. "Come home for Christmas. Your chair is at the table." A real chair, he actually said that, and I could hear my mother's drafting in it, the way you can taste when someone else salted a dish. And then the closer, delivered with his eyes down. "Mom even says, she'll put your name on Grandma's house, the Quarry Road place. It'd come to you someday anyway. She knows what your next phone call could be, honey, and she's scared it'll ruin her. No investigators, no courts. Family handles family." He finally looked up at me and his eyes were wet, and his voice cracked out of the script into something real. "You'd have everything back, honey, everything you ever wanted from us." And God help me, he was right. That was the precise engineering of it. 27 years of wanting exactly this. The seat, the name, the house with the garden, my father's eyes on me instead of on the tablecloth, dangled in a hospital room with the price tag turned discreetly over. All I had to do was keep the one skill I'd been perfecting my whole life. All I had to do was stay quiet. Behind me, Pearl's monitor kept its small green time, steady, patient, and for a second, the beeping sounded like a metronome, like something counting. I looked at the woman in the bed, who had never once in her life asked me to earn her. Then I looked at my father, and I heard myself exhale, and it sounded like the end of something. "Sit down, Dad," I said. And he sat, because the chair was there and his knees were tired, and his daughter used her nurse voice. I held the ring on its chain where he could see it. "You know what Grandma told me when she gave me this? She said, some things shouldn't go in the ledger." His face moved. "Mom's offer is a ledger, Dad. It's the nicest page anyone's ever written me in it. My chair, my name, my inheritance, line items, price to move, and the price is that I never say out loud what happened to Grandma. I've been paying into that book my whole life waiting for it to balance, and it never balances, because the bookkeeper needs me in debt. The vote was her collecting. This offer is just her lending." I looked at Pearl. The fog had taken her somewhere else again. Her hand had gone soft around the ring, trusting it to me. "She's got maybe a good year left, Dad. Whatever's left of her is not going to be spent as leverage in a settlement between her daughter and a courtroom. Not while I'm licensed and breathing." My father, very quietly, "She's your mother, Vani." "I know," I said. "And Pearl is hers. Tell her I'm not voting on this. I'm done with votes." Then I walked past him into the hallway, under the fluorescent hum, past the vending machine with its tired glow, and I did the thing that ends the old life and starts whatever this one is. I called the county's Adult Protective Services line, gave my name, my license number, my relationship to the victim, and said the sentence out loud for the first time. I'm calling in a mandated report of financial exploitation of an elder. The suspected party is my mother. My voice held. It held the way it holds at 3 a.m. bedsides, which is to say, because it has to. Then I called Marjorie Okafor's after-hours line and said, "File it, tonight." Through the wire glass window of the family lounge I could see my father sitting with his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands. And I understood with perfect clarity what I had just spent. Not the $7,500, though that was gone too. My little white house with the porch, traded for a retainer and a courtroom. No, I had spent the family. The door I'd been knocking on for 27 years, I'd just taken